At the 2025 U.S. Priority Draft, the Moose Jaw Warriors selected RJ Thompson, second overall from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Of course, played this year with Detroit Little Caesars, 14U AAA. Had a great year. We'll talk about that. But first off, RJ, it's nice to finally meet you. Let's get your reaction. What was your reaction? I know we're new to this process, but second overall to the Moose Jaw Warriors.
First off, thanks so much for having me. But I was super excited. It was really an honor to be selected by Moose Jaw. And yeah, just super pumped.
Have you ever heard of Moose Jaw prior to being selected?
Actually, yes. So I lived in Seattle for a couple years back in the day and watched Matthew Barzell and Scotty Enzer with the Thunderbirds back in the day when they were really good. And watched the WHL, heard of Moose Jaw, heard they were a great team. Yeah, it was just really cool.
Now, is there a little connection between your family and the Matejchuk family?
I played with Crosby uh, last week at the WSI tournament. So I got to meet him, great kid, great family. And yeah, I love playing with him.
Well, Denton Matejchuk had a pretty big impact here on Moose Jaw, as I'm sure Crosby probably showed you or told about you. Let's talk about yourself, RJ. What
Mhm.
type of player are you? We look at the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves. 20 games, 28 goals, 52 points. But how would you describe yourself as a player?
I would describe myself as a 200-foot centerman. He was very offensively gifted too, but hard-working player who hates to lose and will do anything it takes to win.
A lot of commitment to be a 200-foot center.
Hmm.
How do you
Yeah,
work on that throughout the course of the year?
I think just sticking to the details. Never letting yourself go too far. Just being very detail oriented. Very much understanding where you got to be at times and staying where you got to be.
Now, the next two questions are similar, but they're different. First
Mhm.
off, if you had to compare yourself to a player, who would it be and why?
I always try to play like Sidney Crosby. Very very guy who very skilled forward. Who's 200-foot centerman. Loves to win, but I think at this point, I try to play like a young Jonathan Taves who has that 200-foot centerman, but is very offensively gifted too. So kind of like same player in that sense.
Now, are those players kind of where you model your game after or where you want to be?
Yes, I think those two guys are. I've grown up watching. Tried definitely to model a game after.
Now, you say you model after Taves and Crosby, but who is your favorite NHL player?
I say my favorite NHL player is Matthew Barzell. Like I said, watching him the Thunderbirds. I was younger, grew up loving this game. Just the way he skated, like you could just see he was going to be a special player at that time, and just love watching him play.
He had some great teams, right? I mean, Barzell and Ryan Gropp won the Western Hockey League
Hmm.
championship not that long ago. Does that exposure to the Western Hockey League help you in your potential transition to the Western Hockey League?
I think definitely. I think watching, being around that when you're younger is pretty cool, and I think definitely.
I heard there is a connection with you and Ryan Kesler, former
Yes.
NHLer. Can you tell me about
Mhm.
this?
So I played at Detroit Little Caesars. He was my head coach. Great guy. Obviously, he was an unbelievable hockey player, but truly a great coach too.
So you get this exposure from a guy who had a long NHL career. How does that help you develop your game?
I think just like I said earlier, the details. He's a great player. He was unbelievable, but he's a great coach too. I mean, he's a 200-foot centerman and helped me definitely learn the game. And obviously, I had a bunch of other great coaches there who helped me learn too. And my teammates, obviously, in your daily practices and stuff, it was definitely learn a lot.
Is there a little detail that you think he's helped you with the most?
I'd probably just say there's so many details in being a 200 centerman. So just always, being behind the puck, being in that area where you can always help out your D. You can always be in a position to go super fast forward, but just timing everything and just being in great spots.
You could probably talk for hours on the influence that Ryan Kessler's had on you on the ice, but how about off the ice to be able to, ask an individual who's seen a lot, who's done a lot, how has he affected you off the ice?
I think he's just shown me how hard you truly have to work in a day, day-to-day basis. I think, he showed all of us, what it takes to win, I think, and it's really an influence on me, wanting to get up every morning and just start working to try to be better the next day. It's all about improving every single day because you got to know like everyone else is working too. But I think also, off the ice, just being a good person, that's it's all about culture and a team. And I think that's one thing we really had at Little Caesars, a great
RJ,
culture.
oh sorry, RJ. You'll
Mhm.
there's development camp into May. There's training camp
Mhm.
in August. How excited are you to get to Moose Jaw and show these fans what you can do on the ice?
I'm super excited. I'm pumped to go up there and check things out. It's gonna be really cool.
Do you think it helps you the fact that you live in Minnesota? There's not much difference between Minnesota and Saskatchewan. Does that kind of help
Mhm.
your comfort level as well?
I think definitely, obviously growing up here, it's probably I've never been to Moose Jaw, but I think it's probably the same, with the Great Plains and stuff. So yeah.
And maybe it gets a little bit colder, but it's pretty much the same thing, right?
Yeah,
It's pretty much the same thing. As well, RJ, coming to Moose Jaw and meeting new players, is that the bonds that you're looking forward to making with some potential new teammates?
definitely. I think it's all about, those relationships with players, just not only on the ice, but off the ice too. I think, friendships are awesome,